Good afternoon. It is May 29th, 2022. And what you're about to see, this is part 2 of FIGBUSTERS Winter Dieback in 7A. The introductory was the video before this, part 1. And what you're about to see is a work in progress. I've got so much work to catch up on. And so we're not going to spend any time on my fig trees, which I would love to do right now. But I've got some cleaning up to do. They're doing all very, very nicely. I love my fig trees, as I've said so many times, and they love me back. And we can see little figlets. They're all over the place. There's going to be a lot of figs this summer. But let's move on. Let's go look at the dieback. Again, this is a work in progress. I've been cleaning up for days. Spring cleanup. And I was so sad when I returned from my vacation to see that so many fig trees had succumbed to the cold winter winds. And to make a long story short, there used to be a big hedgerow out there, huge for 40 years, and then the farmer took it out for irrigation, which is understandable, so that his big machines could roll over the field without hitting the trees that were out there, the windbreak. And I get tremendous winds out here now in the winter time. And so I've explained everything in the introductory, the video before this, that it was a perfect winter to test the temperatures down to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And I know for a fact that they were never colder than that here. But I'm going to show you by microclimate that wind chill does matter. And there's a reason for that. It has to do with the pulpwood. I might have to save that for another video. But let me go very quickly through it. The daytime temperatures when the sun comes out are restorative. And the pulpwood that's inside is surrounded by hardwood. And fig trees are different than pear trees and cherry trees and apple trees. They have a pulpwood. And I've said this 100 times. A fig is a fig is a fig is a fig is a fig. It's a different kind of wood. It's a different kind of tree. Don't expect any super biology differences, any huge genetic differences between variants or variations of fig varieties. Yes, there is some. And my theory about that is that the pulpwood, which is very susceptible to freezing, the pulpwood inside of the fig branch could be a little less moist, or maybe a little more, depending on the variation. And then through natural selection and through human selection over the centuries, maybe the fig farmers, figsters, old figsters, we're newer figsters, but the old figsters that loved their craft, they loved their hobby like we did, like we do, they selected these branches that they saw maybe did a little better in the spring. And maybe from a slight variation on the tree, maybe one branch or several branches had a pulpwood that had a lower moisture content. And it's sort of like my theory, because I've been looking at this for many, many, many years. And so they took this branch and they propagated the branch, and lo and behold, the tree that grew out of that branch maybe had that selective difference, where maybe the pulpwood was just a little more or less moist, or less moisture or more moisture. And if it had less moisture, maybe it wasn't quite as susceptible to freezing. I don't know the mechanics of it, the genetic mechanics of it, but I theorized over the years. It doesn't matter, notwithstanding, right or wrong, bottom line, a fig is a fig, and it's a different kind of wood, and it's only going to be able to sustain so much cold temperature before it succumbs to it. These trees, now this is a we can look at some of these varieties. This is actually a Celeste, a Chincoteague Celeste, which I'm sorry to say didn't make it because of these howling winds. Now you will see that this same variety made it in a microclimate. Okay, this is Bass's Bethlehem Black, which is a variant, a slight variant of what I call Hardy Chicago. Some call Chicago Hardy. We've already talked about that, but it's a Hardy Chicago variant. And the reason for the variants, and we talked about this before, is because of different countries over the centuries. You know, the Greeks, the Romans, the Carthaginians moving these fig trees all over the place, sometimes into the colder mountainous areas. And then again, those genetic differences that we talked about just a little while ago. And hand selecting them, and maybe also natural selection too. All right, they got spread around and they got separated. Some were in Sicily, some were here, some were in northern Italy, southern Italy, who knows where. And there were variations that occurred because of the geography, because of the weather, because of the soil content, and because of the selective practices of the figsters that handled them over the centuries. And so they're all very closely related, but there are some differences. And this one, I'm surprised that it just completely died back. I mean, I don't even see anything coming out of the ground, which is very rare, but I did not mulch my trees this winter, which I explained in my previous video, which I am an advocate of that. I really think that makes a difference as far as protecting the roots. So here's another variety. Let's see what it is. I can't read it. We'll come back to it. But it's dead. You can see it's dead from the winds. And winter chill does make a difference because it takes away the opportunity for the fig tree to recover. It takes a while for the cold to penetrate down to the pulpwood, and in the daytime, if it's covered, even lightly, even just a little light covering, like just a tarp with some bricks on the bottom, that's all. You can prune it back if you want to, right? And just put a tarp over it. You don't even have to, just pull it together with a rope like I've shown you before. And just that little bit of a windbreak would have saved this tree, but I did not have time to do it. Okay, we move over to here, and you'll see also extensive damages to these. And there are different varieties. Some of these are brown turkey even. Some of these are English brown turkey. That one. This is an English brown turkey. This one is Tiger, LSU Tiger. And you can see that it experienced extensive damage. This Tiger. Dead. I don't see anything coming up, but it's okay. There's some roots down there because this branch survived. Why? Who knows? But it did. Okay, but it took a terrible beating. Oh, I see new growth down there coming up, shooting up. It has to be alive because this branch is alive. And I'll let this grow and I'll prune all these back, but this tree's going to be removed. I have another one. I have others. Here we have red Lebanese. This one is red Lebanese, that one. And it is also a Mount Etna Hardy Chicago type variant, and a little redder inside, thus red Lebanese, not to be confused with Lebanese red. This is red Lebanese. It's a variety that many people like. I liked it too, but you can see that it's really took a beating. And this branch doesn't belong to it. It belongs to that tree over there. So I don't see anything coming up. It took a real beating. This one, let's see what it is. We're just going to go through it. It doesn't really matter too much what they are. But this one is Saint Rita. You can see that. And it took a beating. It really took a lot of damage. But it has one surviving branch, so we'll see what we're going to do with that. Here's the yellow longneck, and the yellow longneck is just dead. You've seen this in other videos. It's just dead. There's not even a surviving branch on it. And I wouldn't have expected it to survive either. Over here we have a Desert King type plant. Desert King is very winter hardy, and some of the branches survived and some of the branches are damaged or didn't survive. Okay. I don't want to take too much time in varieties. I don't have to dig that one up. See what it is. Caramo. It's dead. Which is usually a tough tree, but again, in 7A with no covering whatsoever, it just couldn't survive. It took a beating. This one, I should know these a little better than I do. Again, I can't find it. I have it written down somewhere. Oh, here's a tag. Oh, that one. Okay, I'm not ready to pronounce that right now. But you know the variety if you're familiar with it, and it's dead. Dead. So these are going to be, I'm going to get my tractor out with a bucket, and I'm actually going to extract these from the ground, pull them from the ground, or get an axe and chop them away. And here, very quickly, I've been doing some pruning on my persimmons trees, and this time I prune them very lightly. I think pruning persimmons too vigorously or aggressively is a mistake, generally. Sometimes I take some of the branches out so there's more sunlight and more air flowing through them. Not too much. But this time I just took out the low branches, like these, because they were hanging down and it's hard to get under them with the lawnmower. And I did that all over the yard. A lot of the trees, some of them I've cleaned up and put in the fire. Others I haven't gotten to yet. But mostly the lower branches so that the trees grow upright nicely. Anything hanging down I get rid of. And I try to get an upright tree. Enough on that. Let's move on. So you can see what happens when you have a windswept area in 7A where the temperatures go down to 10 degrees Fahrenheit and there's no covering. Had there been coverings, and I've been doing this for years, had there been coverings, the results would have been much different. Okay, and this one, I said I'd come back to this. Gosh darn, oh, this is, okay, this is just a tree. I call this one Brenda. It was a tree that I gave to a neighbor and then I took it back. Took a cutting from it. I made an air layer because I wanted to get it back into my collection because I gave the only one I had away. Unfortunately, I don't see anything coming up from the ground on that either. And that is also a Mount Etna type. All right. I'm not going to put pause because the other day I was starting a video and I put it on pause and it just didn't work after that. The phone camera clicked off and that was it. So you have to bounce around with me a little bit. Out here I'll show you some more varieties. I'm surprised this is Desert King and it had no protection at all from the wind and the cold, and it's dead. Okay, so it's going to come up. I'm going to get the tractor and pull it up. Now here's also a sister plant. It's a Desert King, but a couple of the branches survived. Maybe it was a little older. You see it's a little bigger. The older they are, the more capable they are of sustaining the cold. And there are a couple surviving branches, but I'm going to remove the whole tree. I've got too many trees. I've got this down in 7B. You've seen it in my other videos. And I've got it in a pot somewhere. and I don't need it. This is Canadria. Some say Canadria, potato, who cares? I don't. Okay, but that's what this one is. Iracondit's Canadria. And it died. And I mean it died, it's dead. Out here with no protection at all. Interesting, now this is Violet de Bardot. And I see a little bit of growth on the bottom. Not much. And the rest of it has died back. And this is Violet de Bardot. This is a good tree too. But anyway, I've grown this tree. I even have some still against the house. I tried to remove it before and some roots came up, so it's not something that I don't, I've had it for decades, so I'm not worried too much about it. We'll see what happens if that starts to grow back up from the bottom, and if it does, I'll nurture it and just cut away the dead wood. Here's an interesting thing too. I want to show you that when you see this in the spring, like you see it in these joints, you see a deep crack, just get rid of the tree. Because even if you have some of the pulpwood that survived, and I've talked about this before, and the pulpwood was just partially frozen, but not thoroughly frozen, and then you get some shoots in the spring, and you think, oh boy, it survived. No, it didn't. It received a mortal blow from the winter cold, and it's not ever going to fruit properly. If you see it that it's budding late and not budding vigorously, get rid of it. And especially if you see any cracks in the joints and things like that, there's things to look for. We will maybe talk about it again. Now here's a tree that Nordland, which I'm very happy to say, this one, even out in this wind and cold, Nordland. I'm happy to say that it survived. This is a good fig too, usually. Sometimes it's a problem with splitting if you get a lot of rain, but mostly it's a good fig, and it's a very good tasting fig. And we can talk about varieties another time. But the interesting thing about it, and I'm very happy to say once again, is that it survived. Every terminal branch survived, every one. And I can tell that the pulpwood's not damaged also. I can tell by it. Just from experience, I'm able to tell. This is going to fruit. This tree is going to fruit. So it gets to stay. It's even in one of my grow bags, which I talked about in my other videos, which is a way of protecting fig trees because I sometimes extract them from the ground. I'm cutting back. I've said it many times in my videos. I'm cutting back on a lot of varieties, especially where I have more than one. I'm moving some to 7B, where they survive better in the wintertime. And the ones that I have duplicates of, I'm getting rid of. Or even ones that I don't have duplicates, if they're just not real good performers in the ground, they're going. I know the good figs that I like, the good varieties that I like, and I don't need any more than that. Now, this is Black Greek. Now, I want to talk to you very quickly about that, not too long. I have, I think, 2 Black Greeks that died, but this one didn't die completely. And it took a beating, but it's okay. It's going to survive. All right, a couple little broken ends here, dead ends, dieback. But it's going to survive, so it gets to stay. But very often when you send away for a tree, you might just get a hardy Chicago type. It is a variant in the Mount Etna type. And you never know what you're really going to get half the time. I mean, honestly, you really don't. You're not guaranteed 100%. Let's just put it that way is what I mean to say. And this could be just a hardy Chicago, or it could just be an anomaly that it survived. But there's not a big difference between all of those, and we've spoken about that. We've talked about this at length. There's not a lot of differences between these Mount Etna varieties, and there's not a lot of differences about the Adriatic types. They're all essentially the same, and I mean that. I believe that with all my heart. And someday we will discuss it in more detail in another Fig Buster video. But you have to remember, a fig is a fig is a fig is a fig. There are limitations, okay? And a lot of these things are being sold sometimes. And listen, I'm asked all the time, who do I recommend to buy cuttings from? I might put out a small list, maybe just 3. But I don't want anybody to be offended if they're not on that list. It doesn't mean that they're not good sellers or reputable or honest. And that's integrity is something very important, high on my list, on my priority list. Honesty, helpfulness, honesty, and people that aren't trying to gouge. And there are gougers out there, and there are swindlers. Buyers beware. And there are good people out there. And I've never said there isn't, but you have to learn how to distinguish between good and bad. Okay? Just like I talked in the earlier video, part 1 to this, you have to learn how to distinguish between truth and fiction. Okay? You have to assimilate all the information, assimilate it. Okay? And you have to make a determination and be able to try to be able to separate truth from fiction. And you have to do that with the sellers out there, good from bad. And there are some really very, very bad ones. There's some very unscrupulous sellers that are in it for just the buck. You can't rely on them. But I will say in another video, I will give 3 names, but I don't want anybody else to be offended, because that doesn't mean they're not good or that I never dealt with them. But I can't go into a big detail about it. I'm not a seller. As you know, I've said in my videos, I am exchanging information with fig enthusiasts out there everywhere. I'm conveying the information that I've accumulated over the years to them. I don't want anything from you. I haven't asked anything of you. If you subscribe, that's wonderful. At least I see that you're appreciating my videos. I have well over 100 videos. And they're not easy to make. Okay, it's a chore. But I do it out of love. And I have a hobby that I've loved for many, many decades, and I revere the hobby. I respect it. It doesn't mean that I think it's wrong to sell cuttings or fig trees. I do not think that. They are providing a wonderful service. They're helping to circulate trees to people that want to get involved and be interested in this hobby, this wonderful hobby of mine, and I give them credit. So never think that. That is not my purpose. It's just that I don't sell them. You know, in another video, I would like to maybe give you some of my background. I think I would like to provide that to you for any of you out there that would be interested in listening on the things that I've done in my life, environmentally, with the township, with several townships, with putting in an artificial reef in the ocean and taking land away from the Army Corps of Engineers that was earmarked for destruction with dredging and saving it for the community. You know, I spearheaded those things over the years, and I received some rewards and things from I received one of my most valuable awards that I've won was just the Good Citizens Award for my township for actually protecting the groundwater in another situation. I was on committees. To oversee large chemical plants. I don't want to name the plants that wanted to put rotary kiln incinerator in our township. And it was a 4-year committee, and you know, eventually we decided not to allow it in our township. I've done a lot of environmental things, and those are the things I like to give back more than I take. Put it that way, okay? And I have always given back much more than I have ever taken. That's my way. Is there anything wrong with the commercialization of fig trees or cutting? No, absolutely not. Okay? Someday I may actually put some of my varieties out there that are heirlooms, family heirlooms, and some other ones that I love so much that I'm not discontinuing. I may put them out there, you know, for my viewers, just to preserve them into perpetuity. I mentioned that before, but I have no plans of doing that, and I probably never will, to be completely honest with you. Okay, so these trees are going to go. The ones that are bad, that didn't do well, are dying. These two are they're going to be removed, and these two are going to stay. That I just went over with you. Okay. Now we're going to walk back this way. Now this becomes more interesting, because now you're going to see some microclimates right up against the house. Okay, and you're going to see some a little further away from the house, and you're going to be able to see the differences it makes. Having a windbreak, a complete windbreak, or a partial windbreak can make a real difference. There's no question about it. Again, just a light covering can really protect your trees in 7A. A loose covering, but remember this, if you do a loose covering, and if it's just one layer, and it works, my neighbor does it, I gave her trees. Her trees are doing well. If you put just a tarp, you have to put it on. I think the best method for doing that is after the trees become dormant. Make sure that you put it on after the trees are thoroughly dormant. And I think remove it before the trees start to bud out, like in the middle of March or the end of March. Don't worry about the cold or the frost. That's not what's going to kill your fig tree. Okay, it's extreme cold that's going to kill your fig tree. Or if it wakes up, out of a deep hibernation and then gets a strong freeze, that could kill it. Or if it's already budded. And you want to delay budding, and that's why you take off the tarp like in mid-March or late March. I think it's better if you do that. Okay. Anyway, this is a dark Sicilian, and next to it was a Black Greek Marius. The Black Greek Marius is dead. It took the brunt of the wind here coming off the field, but I'm sure this received just as much wind. And this named Etna, which is named Sicilian Dark, seems to have done quite well. I see little figlets on it. It's doing real good, and I'm sure it's going to produce a lot of fruit. We move on. Here we have Saltine. It died. It's a French fig. You see it in other videos. It's a wonderful tree. If I'd have covered it, it would have lived. Saltine, and it's dead, completely dead. It was out here in the wind too, without any protection, and I don't see anything coming up from the roots. So I think that later most of these trees will send up some shoots from the roots. I do think that. But you should winter mulch. I always winter mulch. I did not. That was part of the experiment. I didn't have time to do it anyway. Okay, I'm going to have a lot of blueberries on a lot of blueberry trees. This is just one of them. It's loaded. I'm looking forward. I love my blueberries. So we come over here. This is my Sagio Persimmons, and it's just loaded with fruit everywhere. There's just going to be hundreds and hundreds of them, which you've seen in my other videos. If you're interested in persimmons, look at those videos. Here I have a couple little trees that I started last year. Now, interestingly, I just put a 5-gallon bucket over these in the wintertime. And these are Smith. I started them last year, and they survived with a 5-gallon bucket over them. That's all, and a brick. I put these around it. I put the 5-gallon bucket inside there, and they survived nicely. They didn't die. Okay, I'm going to remove them and plant them in 7B. And here you'll see my large Peter's Honey, which survived very nicely. Peter's Honey is a very winter hardy tree. Even though Peter's Honey came from this Mr. Peters, found it in Sicily and brought it back to the public domain. And you would think that because it is a Sicilian tree, and since Sicily is so hot, you would think that it wouldn't be winter hardy. But this particular tree, again, it could have been moved around. It could have come from anywhere, and he found it in Sicily. But this tree is very winter hardy, and it did very, very well, but in a microclimate close to the house. Here's that Violet de Bordeaux I told you about that I had removed some years ago, and the shoots came up last year, and I even has some Breva on it, as you can see. And I'll enjoy eating them. And some of the main crop figs, and it will make main crop figs, and I'll just let them go. All right, we come over here, very, very happy, even though this is further from the house. The Rondi Bardot, which is one of my very, very favorite trees, in ground or in pots. I just absolutely adore it, and I've talked about it incessantly in many of my videos. I just love Rondi. I think it's one of the most valuable fig varieties. In fact, I even have a video that I think I named most valuable players, and it's of course in there on the top. Here is my Celeste. It's a very big tree. Celeste is a very hardy tree, especially if you give it just half a chance. If you give it a little microclimate, this one of course wasn't wrapped, not at all, and it wasn't for the last 3 years. And look at it. I mean, there's figs all over this tree. It's just going to make an abundance of figs just everywhere. And you see this in other videos that I've posted. Celeste is one of my favorite, one of my most practical figs to grow in 7A. All right. Now keep in mind that this is a wonderful test, okay, or experiment, because we went down to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. There wasn't one night where it went down to 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And if it did, I wouldn't be able to say to you that this tree is only good down to, I could only go to the 7 degrees. You know, we wouldn't know what would happen at 10. I like the idea that it happened at 10. It only went down to 10 and no more. We didn't have one night of 5, for instance. Now we know what will happen if it goes down to 10. So if you look at the area that you live in, if you look at your zone carefully, and if you go down to 10 degrees, well, you might know what to expect. With microclimates, no protection, some protection, okay? So, but anything lower than that, well, maybe 1 degree would have killed more trees. I have a friend, Steve, who's a very good, reliable person, and I really enjoy his friendship. And he has a channel, and it's Go Figure Farm. And he does meticulous work, I'm proud to say. And he did post something on a forum, Our Figs, and he talked about the damage that he had over the winter time, and he went down to 11 degrees. That was 1 degree warmer than me. Interesting. So you might want to look at that too, because again, Steve does a great job, and I have an enormous amount of admiration and respect for him. He also sells cuttings and fig trees, and you can always count on Steve's honesty, his integrity. And he's just I highly recommend him. So maybe give him some views and take a look at his website, because he does really take his hobby seriously, and he's made some, I think, substantial contributions to the fig community. Okay, this is another of my Peter's honey trees, a smaller tree that is, you'll see there's a Breva that survived, and a few did. There's a few Brevas did survive on this tree. Okay, I'm happy to say, because the Breva are my favorite of Peter's honey. I mean, I like them both. They're so close. The main crop, I've spoken about this. I'm not going to talk about it again. But I love the Breva. They're bigger, and I think they're just one of the finest figs. I look forward to every single one. I love them. And this is a little tree, and there's not that many Breva. There's some Breva on the other bigger tree too. So the Breva survived. It's a tough tree. It's a tough tree. But again, it benefited from the microclimate here up against the brick house, as did all these trees. This is a work. This is a